Okay, ladies and gentlemen, fellow colleagues, borsisti, everybody here, thank you so much for coming this afternoon. We're looking forward to a really interesting, stimulating programme for the Lost and Found Places, Objects and People event today at the British School at Rome. This, as we have been publicising across our social media and is well known to everybody in the UK, given the extent of coverage, is a vital part of the Being Human Festival, which has been coordinated by the School for Advanced Studies, the University of London, a consortium of research institutes. I think of ourselves as somehow almost twinned with SAS in terms of being one of the BIRI, one of the British International Research Institutes, very much given the same brief in terms of ensuring that there's a dynamic research presence in various centres across the world. The festival, Being Human, is sponsored by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. It's sponsored partly by the British Academy, who's also one of the funders of our school. It's sponsored in part also by the Wellcome Institute. And we're very, very privileged, and I'm very thankful to Sarah Churchwell, who's the Professor of Public Engagement and works with SAS in terms of undertaking what is an absolutely crucial job at this juncture, which is to facilitate and engage with the whole debate about the place of the humanities within the academic world and its engagement with the societies that it reflects on and out of which much of its cultural produce is generated. And today we're specifically going to be looking around questions to do with objects, the history of those objects, their trajectories, their kind of provenance, their subsequent fortuna and sfortuna, as they would say in Italy, and we're delighted to have the speakers that we've got. So I'm going to hand over now to Sarah to say something about the Being Human project. Sarah's interest is, I like to see one of your interests is in F. Scott Fitzgerald, and which I had to go through my O-levels, as was then back in the day, reading The Great Gatsby as one of my set texts, which I absolutely adored, and I actually enjoyed the recent film adaptation too, I say anecdotally. One of the things that I do remember about it is the way in which Gatsby's library was a library finta, that it was full of books, but they weren't real books and they'd never been opened, which is the absolute opposite of the British School at Rome, where we do share some commonality in terms of the kind of notion of the facciata, if you like, of the surface, is the fact that we have this lovely frontage to the British School, and somebody said to me last week, and a barracks behind, which is something like Gatsby's Finta Libri, where you've got lovely covers, but you're not quite sure what lies behind them. So we look forward to Sarah introducing the Being Human Festival as part of our participation in it. We're really proud and very thankful for you for coming to London to actually talk to us when there are so many, as you can see. Please take a copy of the programme outside. So many events taking place, not only in the UK, but also internationally and overseas. So Sarah, thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks to everyone at the British School at Rome for your hospitality and your support and your interest indeed in collaborating with us on this event and for this festival. I'm Sarah Churchwell. I'm the director of the Being Human Festival which is, as Stephen explained, is supported by the University of London School of Advanced Study, but is in fact a national festival across the UK. This year will be its 4th year. We run at the end of November every year across the UK. We put on, this year it will be 300 events happening simultaneously over the course of a week across, I think it's 80 cities, no, is that right? No, 80 higher education institutions this year, and 55 cities and towns around the UK, from Belfast in Northern Ireland to Glasgow and Dundee in Scotland, from Aberystwyth and Swansea in Wales to East Anglia, Canterbury and Kent in the southeast, and everywhere in between. So it really does aim to be a national festival, and the whole point of it is to celebrate the great research that's being done in the humanities around the country, but we tried to do that in an approachable way to really emphasize the festival aspect. Say these are not academic papers, these are not conferences. This is about putting ideas out in approachable ways, in ways that make clear to members of the general public as well as to interested members who can, of course, be academics perhaps in other subjects or indeed in their own fields, in ways that are creative, that are often hopefully a little bit surprising, that make you rethink what you thought you knew about the humanities or about the subject in particular. We cover everything from archaeology, arts and antiquities, art history, through literature, history, politics, religion, and of course we also are interested in collaborative work between the humanities and the sciences. So any researcher at an institution in the UK who wants to participate in the festival is invited to apply to us. We don't cherry pick people. It's an open application process. They come to us and we choose the ones that in our minds will demonstrate most broadly the depth and the range of the humanities work that's being done across the country. And then this year, for the first time, we're very, very excited and honored to be able to take this approach international. And thanks to partners like the British School at Rome, we're able to take our theme, and this year it was so perfect that you guys wanted to be involved, because our theme this year is Lost and Found. And it does seem as if people working in archaeology have really quite a lot to say about Lost and Found, which is wonderful. And I am really looking forward to hearing this. As Stephen said, my own expertise is in literature, so I'm going to learn a great deal today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it. Because you mentioned Gatsby, though, I do just have to finish with that, and then I'll stop because we all want to hear our wonderful speakers. But very many people who know The Great Gatsby and F. Scott Fitzgerald know that he wrote the novel on the Riviera, but far fewer people know that he finished it in Rome. And in fact, he was at a hotel in the Spanish Steps across from where Keats died, which was why he ended up there, because Keats was his great hero. And in fact, Keats is infused through the novel. So there is a very strong Rome connection for The Great Gatsby as well. So I'll just throw that out as a little tidbit for the day. Thank you all for coming. As Stephen said, we have programs outside, buttons in which you can assert that you are human if you feel the desire to do so, or if you feel that's an accurate statement. And we also have just some little bags, tote bags. If anybody would like to take some, please do help yourself. And as I say, I'm looking forward very much to this wonderful program of talks, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, who's Robert Dooley from the University of Oxford. Robert has a marvellous personal profile online, which has him leaning against a light aircraft, which gives you some indication of his interests. He was formerly Director of Operations at the Heritage Lottery Fund, Southwest Regional Director, Head of Survey and Aerial Survey, English Heritage, and before that for the Royal Commission on the Historical Monuments of England. He's an Honorary Visiting Professor at the Institute of Archaeology at UCL in London, and Co-Director of the Aerial Archaeology in Jordan project with Professor David Kennedy. Robert has authored multiple books on prehistoric settlements, using again aerial archaeology, developing further practice as another volume. Ancient Jordan from the Air, so is well suited and an old friend of the BSR, where of course we have that wonderful archive of the aerial survey of World War II bomb damage on archaeological monuments. So stands in an august and represents in an august manner a long tradition of work at the British School at Rome. So without more ado, please welcome Robert Dooley.
Afternoon, everybody. While I just get a water, I will, given the badge that we're wearing, that I am human, I wondered whether to tell the joke that I often tell, which is, this project is a huge project, and even if I had 4 hours, I wouldn't get through it, and I've got to do it in 30 minutes, which reminds me of a cartoon I saw in the paper with two hobbits. You all know hobbits, two hobbits in a bar, holding hobbit-sized pints. One says to the other, to cut a very long story short, I threw the ring in the fire. So what you're going to get now is, yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a spoiler. If you haven't watched the film or read the books, tough. If you have, you already knew the ending. And maybe I should have called this talk lost, found and lost again. Because endangered archaeology in the Middle East and North Africa, I always try and put a positive spin on things, but it could be deeply depressing. So I hope that after half an hour, and I've got a nice pink clock here to keep me on time, I'm hoping that although we think sometimes it's mission impossible, there are some positives to come out of it. And the other thing to remember is, as archaeologists, if it wasn't being destroyed and damaged, we'd still be in the Paleolithic if there'd been no change. So, you know, everything changes. A few things that I need to say, partly because we're being filmed and therefore people can check up on what I'm saying. Funded by Arcadia, which is the Arcadia Fund, I should say, a philanthropic organisation, and also now funded by the Cultural Protection Fund, which is UK government money. And we're based in the University of Oxford, but we have partners in the universities of Leicester and Durham. The funding began in 2015 and I thought it would run out in 2017 and therefore I would now be retired, but we've now got more money and we've got to continue until 2020, which, given what we've got to do, is no bad thing. You'll see this slide again, but I just wanted to set it in context, and this is how often I describe the project. It's a voyage of discovery and documenting damage and destruction, which is why after half an hour you may also be depressed, but let's hope not. And the map there shows everything from Mauritania to Iran. And in 2014, when somebody said, do you fancy putting in a proposal for a project to look at all the archaeology from Mauritania to Iran? And you think, yeah, no one will ever go for that. Mauritania is a huge country. Does anybody know anything about Mauritania? Put your hand up and talk to me later. I need help. And also thank you to I would like to thank the British School in Rome for not only inviting me and making sure I was here, but also for giving me homework. Because last night when I got to my room, there was this book, Remote Sensing, Drawings from the British School at Rome. And I thought, how odd, but what a fascinating book. And it's because there are a couple of pictures on the wall, and I think that sets it on context. And to show that I did my homework last night, there's an opening paper in this book by Professor Colin Renfrew, Lord Renfrew of Camesthorne himself, which says, remote sensing involves here the knowledgeable and receptive use of our eyes, those most sensitive of senses, and our imaginations. And a lot of what I tell you today, because I've got to go at speed, you have to believe me that what I can see and what I'm telling you I can see, I really can see. But you have to question it, because it is about interpretation and, as Colin says there, imagination. I thought I'd taken this slide out, but I'm glad I didn't. This, in a way, is just it's a photograph I took on the 1st of September from a light aircraft. As Stephen mentions, I am a pilot, a private pilot, so I can't take you from A to B, really. And it's just, sometimes there are aspects of the landscape that are just so wonderful you want to take a picture of them, not just because it's archaeology, but this is an Iron Age camp in the Malvern Hills, called British Camp, nicely, from the Iron Age. But you could spend a whole hour just talking about this one particular image in terms of not only the archaeology, but also the care and maintenance of it. In fact, I flew the day before yesterday and photographed it again, and it's a lot greener now because we've had some rain over the thing. But, you know, there's a lot of erosion there. And the reason for mentioning this is that I don't want you to think that the Middle East and North Africa has a monopoly on endangering archaeology. We have been endangering our archaeology in other countries and the rest of Europe for a very long time. And I just show this one picture of Stonehenge, that probably the earliest air photograph from a balloon taken by the army when the army was looking after Stonehenge, but clearly not very well. Now it's looked after by English Heritage. It's in much better condition. They've closed the A344, and with any luck the A303 will also be put in a tunnel. That has to be good news. So it's really just to set in context the fact that everything changes, things can improve, but they don't always. And I do want to put into context why the Middle East and North Africa, why we're doing this now. And I've put here previous approaches, wars, treaties, etc. And very quickly, just to mention the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Here, this is France and Great Britain preparing an independent Arab state, and that was in May 1916. And as we're coming up to it, the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, November the 2nd, 1917, so next week it'll be 100 years old, where His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Nothing wrong with that, but it has caused a certain amount of tension and conflict ever since, has it not? More recently, the Arab Spring and the ever-changing situation. There isn't time to go into that ever-changing situation, but not just because this is also about the being human thing. It is a humanitarian crisis. And often we get asked as archaeologists, why do you care about the stones and the bones, but actually it's about the people? And this is just a representation of the people, if you like, an installation by Ai Weiwei with the life vests from Lesbos that he's put on this particular building in Berlin, just as a demonstration of how many people are involved. And there is no question that some of the problems we're facing, if not in those countries that we're working in, but sometimes, for example in Jordan, one of the questions is, well, why are we doing so much work in Jordan when it's not a country of conflict? But a lot of the things that are happening in Jordan are happening because of neighbouring countries. And I'm sure that if you added up all these refugees that have left Syria, that's greater than the total population of Syria. But there's an awful lot of movement going on. And again, we could talk a lot more about it. But in the end, it's about cultural identity. And again, there's not time to go into this, but there is this very, very good book, and now also a film called The Destruction of Memory by Robert Bevan. It's an excellent book. He's revised it in the light of the crisis in Syria and other places. But it's about the deliberate destruction of people's identity in times of war. A very, very moving film, a very good read. So I rather than dwell on that, and I'll get onto the project, it's worth just mentioning that book and film. There was a consequence, of course, of the Sykes-Picot Agreement and also then the creation of Israel, but the particular one was that the French employed this person here, Father Antoine Poidevard, and he produced this amazing book, La Trace de Rome. And he claimed to be a Jesuit priest, or an engineer, or an archaeologist, and he may have been all those things, but he was also a spy. But what he showed was that aerial photography worked in Syria, and the British then also proved that it worked in Jordan. You'll see this one again later. This is Jerash, taken in 1926. So we knew when we started working there that there would be no problem in using what we might refer to as remote sensing. As Stephen mentioned, we created the Aerial Archaeology in Jordan project 1997. Professor David Kennedy was the founder. He took one flight in 1997. That's David there in a helicopter. That's me just next to him. All the photographs right up to date. Our last flight was on the 2nd of October 2017. All the photographs are on our website, 120,000 of them. And when we first started, it was actually to find new sites. But with my kind of eyes as a heritage manager, if you like, I couldn't believe how much destruction I was seeing. And the preservation on some sites, this is one we just took on October the 1st of Machaerus. But even at a site like this, down here in the shadows is a brand new hotel, and as you will see, this is Machaerus where Salome danced and Herod chopped off the head of St. John the Baptist, but let's not go into that. The Romans, these are the siege camps. There are 12 siege camps around it, and one night, so that the Department of Antiquities could not stop them, they bulldozed the Roman camp, built and then put the foundations in for a hotel, and that's how things can change in almost in the flash of an eye. By law in Jordan, if you damage an archaeological site or completely destroy it, you'll be fined £3,000. So £3,000 for a hotel, pay the fine. So just a few slides on the need and the loss and what are we doing. You'll see this again. This is the team in our old office. We used to be in one part of Oxford, now moved. And this is really what we're doing, creating baseline data for sites and landscapes in 20 countries, but building on existing knowledge. Put another way, it's dots on maps. So it's a beginning, it's only a start. And why? And the next few slides really demonstrate why. This is called a pendant burial in Jordan. They're building a bypass in a place that everybody said, don't put the bypass there because this is one of the greatest concentrations of prehistoric archaeology anywhere in Jordan, and Jordan has some pretty good archaeology. And they said, okay, we won't do it there, but they did anyway. And damage here and then they've gone through the pendant here. No one has ever excavated a pendant burial. There was no excavation in advance of this. We don't know what they are, except we assume they are burials. We had, until a few weeks ago, we'd always thought this was looting, but actually all of the chambers are empty. So it's almost as if they were deliberately empty, as if they're there for some kind of ritual, some kind of festival. There are thousands of these, admittedly, but as yet no one has ever excavated them, so we know nothing about them, which is another reason for wanting to do the investigation. As archaeologists, we know we can't preserve everything, nor should we. And I made the kind of slightly flippant comment earlier that if we didn't have change, then we'd still be in the Paleolithic. But the point of archaeology is we want to be able to record things before they're damaged and destroyed. We used to have this ridiculous phrase in English heritage called preservation by record. It's not, it's destruction by record, but at least there's a record. What we don't want is destruction without any record. And I'm just going to show you 3 slides. This one is from 2011, and images of a landscape in the eastern desert in Egypt, and these are ancient mining structures to do with the precious metals that exist in this landscape, and these date from Roman, pre-Roman and post-Roman, and it's a fairly quiet landscape in that there's not much going on. 1 year later, that's what the landscape looked like, and the reason for this is that partly as a result of the economic crash in 2008, when the price of precious metals went up, because what do people do in economic crisis? They buy gold. It was worth, all the permissions were in place, and it was worth the mining companies actually going out and digging these areas for the precious gold. As you can see, it's labor intensive, and it's an amazing undertaking, but it's worth them doing it. And the reason is this one particular mine. This is 2005, a very small mine here, and then if you look at it 10 years later, that's the same place, and that's the processing area for all the stuff that's coming from that area. So it's massive, and it isn't just to do with either the Arab Spring or conflict. It's people taking opportunities whenever they want. We'll come on to why the other threats, and to me one of the greatest threats to the archaeology is through population increase, and therefore you need more people, so it's the intensification of agriculture. And I showed this very briefly before, photograph taken in 1926 of Jerash, one of the Decapolis cities. You can see here the outer wall of the city running across here and round here, and the hippodrome here. Some of you may well have visited. It looks very different now. And this is a Circassian settlement from a previous troubled times in the late 19th century, when the Circassians were booted out of Russia in one of their many pogroms. And this is what it looks like, not quite today, but it's not much different. This is a few years ago. And when you look at the contrast of that to that, admittedly it's the other way around, but there's the Circassian settlement. The Jordanians have allowed them to build a road all round the outside there, and then off it feeds all this here. And of course, with any archaeological city, it isn't just what's inside, it's what's outside. These are where the farms and the burials and the activities that help feed the city go on. There's a wonderful wadi system running through it. There's water management. As a result of this uncontrolled and unplanned and unsurveyed area, apart from some work David Kennedy did called the Jerash Hinterland Survey, UNESCO said Jerash cannot be a World Heritage Site. And yet, its setting, its location is wonderful. It's a super place, and it should be a World Heritage Site, but they allowed this to go on without any thought. Now, we can ask the question about how useful World Heritage Sites are, but I think this would have been a benefit if they'd said, for the sake of World Heritage status, just go out, even if it was half a kilometre, would have made a huge difference. Again, not time to go into the detail of these sites, but these are Neolithic hunting sites that range from Yemen right up to Kazakhstan. They're called kite sites. They're called kites because the early pilots in the 30s who were flying from Cairo to Baghdad saw what they thought were the strings of a kite, and then this, if you like, is the flying bit of a kite. But they are 5th to 7th millennium hunting sites, and the gazelle and other animals would be just driven in here, and there's a narrow here, and then they would be either scared or spooked or something, and they would panic when they were in this bit and run out. And excavations by a French team have discovered that these circles here are effectively the killing pits, and they're 8 to 10 feet deep, and the gazelle, and at one of them they found a gazelle at the bottom, and so they're actually Neolithic hunting sites, but in a sustainable way, because you probably only kill 1 or 2% of the herds that are going through. There are thousands of these, and as yet probably only 3 or 4 have ever had any form of survey or excavation. But this is what struck me, was the bulldozers. What on earth is the bulldozer driver doing? It's completely random. Doesn't look like they're picking anything up. Yes, there's a road through there, and you can understand these in relation to the road. But what is going on? It's as if they're on a job creation scheme to just drive bulldozers across the landscape. We still, after 20 years of flying over it, we still don't understand what they're doing. And then other examples from satellite imagery. This is in Saudi Arabia, and this is a gridded, we think, for a seismic survey, again looking for oil and gas. And it's not as if the archaeologists would say, don't do your survey, but it would have been really useful to have known in advance that they were going through some very sensitive archaeology that we know nothing about. It would have been fantastic to have been able to do some excavation in these areas, to have just been, even half an hour or a day or 2 days in advance of when they did this survey. So if we don't know that the archaeology is there, we can't even ask the question. So the purpose of our project is to try and record this. Halfway through the slides, halfway through, I'm doing all right. Because I don't want to overrun. Now, obviously Palmyra, a lot of people have heard about Palmyra, and I hesitate to say what I'm about to say, but actually, although the damage that was done at Palmyra was devastating, an awful sight, if you want more information on Palmyra, have a look at this website, Monuments of Syria. And the Monuments of Syria website is updated by somebody called Ross Burns. Now, Ross was the former Australian ambassador to Syria, Lebanon, Israel, lots of places, but he fell in love with Syria. And he's written a book, The Ancient Monuments of Syria. He now, in his retirement, updates this every fortnight, tells you what's going on. Obviously, with ISIS now in retreat and virtually expelled from Syria, there's much less damage from the ISIS front. But these were the tower tombs, one of which that was blown up, as you will see from this satellite image, that one there. And one of the theories is that it was blown up to hide what they'd done before they blew it up. On the inside of these, for those of you who've been there, and I haven't, but I'm told, on the inside of these there are lots of beautiful carvings and friezes. And the story is that maybe ISIS had sold some of those, or given them to their donors, and therefore to cover the tracks they blew it up. So there are lots of reasons why things get destroyed, which may not be the reasons that you see in the press. I was once telephoned by somebody from Newsweek, and he heard what was going on in Syria, and he said, well, you're doing Middle East and North Africa. Shouldn't we make a list of all the really important sites in North Africa and publish them and say these must be protected? And I said, no, Jack, we shouldn't, because guess what will happen if we do that? And he went, what do you mean? I said, well, ISIS will then target them because they know we care. That's why they do it. They don't really, if we didn't care, they wouldn't do it. So we're not going to publish your priority list of North Africa. He understood after that, and we stayed friends. Another example here in Yemen, very quickly. This is the citadel here in Taiz. Taiz is the second largest city in Yemen, and they decided they wanted to do restoration. And if you follow it through, this is 2006, starting the restoration of this, 2014 full restoration, and then within 12 months damage from the current conflict. And the whole of what they've done here effectively gone in a couple of strikes that were done. We're not sure why. The coalition that was working there basically said, well, it's a Houthi rebel stronghold. We're not sure that's true. It may well have been that they were bombing because they thought it would be a stronghold, but there was no evidence that actually that it was being used by the Houthis at all. So there's an awful lot going on. Other examples here, the next slide I'm going to show you is this site here, but I wanted to set it in context. This is 8 kilometers east of Amman in Jordan, 8 kilometres from the airfield we've been flying for 20 years. Massive quarrying of the limestone because a man has grown from being... the population increase in Jordan is currently at something like 2,400% since the 1970s. Amman is now a population of 3 or 4 million, which is nearly half the whole country population. So there's massive building going on. And we happened to find this site at that location. It's clearly under threat. We photographed it just the other week. But it's a quarry site for the drums, for the columns, for ancient Philadelphia that is Amman. So you can see these columns are just about ready to be shipped. Here's one that's just been cut out and not ready at all. Here's the outline of another one that's just about to be cut. And what I love about this photograph is that it's something we didn't know about, so it's new. The Department of Antiquities had never photographed it. We visited the day after we took the picture and then found another one over the other side of the thing. But can you imagine being the Roman quarrymen or the quarrymen during the Roman period, and they suddenly realized the Roman Empire's over. We're not going to get paid. And they just downed tools and left it. And no one's been back since. Now that seems to me the kind of site where actually you do want to put a fence around it and say, let's leave that for future investigation and excavation. It's a fascinating site. And I'm not a Romanist. Sorry, son. But it is a great place. So, endangered archaeology, looting and trafficking, and I've put nothing new. I was at a lecture last week in London by Stefan Simon, who runs the Yale University unit for protection of cultural heritage, also funded by Arcadia, and he showed me this slide, which is the Arch of Titus, I believe, and the looting in the 1st century AD of some Jewish treasures, the menorah, and a couple of slides just in the trial of Gaius Verres, if that's how you pronounce him, saying this place was so stripped and plundered by Verres that it seems to have been in the hands not of an enemy but of some barbarian pirates. And no city in all Asia or in all Greece has ever sold one statue, one picture or one decoration of the city of its own free will to anybody. So nothing changes. Looting and trafficking has been going on for a very long time. The causes of looting and the mechanism by which objects are sold or transferred is a really complex one, and we can perhaps talk about it in any discussion we might have. But this is the Roman city of Apamea in Syria, 2011. That's literally 1 year later, and it's gone from being a government-owned, government-controlled, perfectly safe place to an industrial looting exercise here, and then each of those little pits is a looting pit. And it's not just in the Roman bit, there's also, as you can see here, the citadel here. We believe this was licensed by ISIS, and the way it worked is ISIS would charge the looter a certain amount of money to have the license, so ISIS gets the money, the looter then has to sell on the goods to a middleman, and the middleman then has to sell it on to somebody else, and it will end up in the normal places: London, Paris, Rome, New York, Beijing, Delhi, and Qatar and other places. And to me, this is the one site. I know it's a lot of Roman sites, but it can't be helped. Dura Europus, or I think other people call it Europus Dura, but anyway, we call it Dura Europus, on the Euphrates, up on the Syrian border. A wonderful site. Here, December 2011. Effectively, the only damage done. Well, sorry, I shouldn't call it damage. The only investigations done was by archaeologists trying to understand it, and we don't fully understand it yet. And then you look at it again in 2014, you can see massive looting here, and I wanted to make this a bit of a case study for us. So in early December 2015, we said, can we have the most up-to-date imagery? And the people we buy it from said, no, we will never get it for 6 months. But luckily enough, on the 25th of December, nobody wanted to look at satellite imagery, so they sent it to us, which was wonderful. But it is truly depressing in terms of the scale of the looting that's gone on here, both inside the city and outside the city. And there's a debate going on as to how deep each of these, does it go down to bedrock, is there anything left? But if there was somewhere we would go after the conflict is over, I think there should be a big international grouping that should look at this to see just how much is left, because this is on a massive scale. And I've seen videos of them actually excavating, and they're clearly people who are trained in archaeological methods in terms of the excavation, but there are no records kept. But where are the objects? We have no idea, and we can come on to that later. So what more can we do? Obviously, understanding looting and trafficking. Do have a look at the traffickingculture.org website, created by Neil Brodie and Donna Yates. Neil has now joined our project from September 2016 to try and his basic philosophy is what we've got to try and do is reduce the demand for the objects. Buying unprovenanced objects is just morally and legally wrong, and yet people still do it. They want objects. Wealthy people will pay anything for objects that they want to have on their mantelpiece or in their private museum. Now, I just wanted this was in the paper recently, and Qatar, because of the boycott around Qatar, it's now devoting something like 10,000 hectares to the production of milk by importing Irish cows. And my point here is that 32% of all sites so far recorded in Libya, okay, it's Libya, but you could then extrapolate to other countries, are affected by agricultural activities. That's 32% of all the sites so far that we've looked at. And if you extrapolate that further, in terms of the cultivated area from 1975 to now, and that's because of population increase. So that's been the intensification of agriculture in that period from 1975 to 2015. So 40 years, that's what's happened. And that's just for Libya, but it's the same pattern right across the Middle East and North Africa. And then another example here, this is work done by Louise Rain in our Leicester office, just to show sites damaged by agriculture and where we've actually done some of the work that you can see. So you can see that the agricultural damage is as bad as anything, and probably is the single most, both in Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, and probably the rest of the world. It's the single most thing. So what are we doing about it? You've seen this one already. We're creating the baseline data for sites, as I've mentioned, and Pier Francesco, who luckily is in the audience, was working with us. He's doing a PhD at Sapienza University. The only piece of paper we use is this wall chart created by Pier Francesco, which the staff now fill in each of their grid squares in a manual way. It's the only bit of paper in the project. The rest is digital and online, so people can look at it. We've created 150,000 sites records across all that area in just 2.5 years. We've created a database that is available online, freely accessible, but restricted in that not everybody can see all the detail, which is the right thing to do. But if you are a bona fide archaeologist, researcher, professional archaeologist, you can get access to our database. There's no problem there. And what it does, this is just taken from Mega Jordan, but it is dots on maps, all polygons with a description. So that's very important. Very important that we monitor and protect. So if we know there's a ring road, this is Madaba, we did a survey in Madaba, found 11 sites that were affected by the ring road, and the Department of Antiquities are looking at them, and I know they are looking at them, which is great. And I just want to show this one site here. We photographed this site in 1998, happened to be passing in 1999. Where's the site? Completely gone. Bulldozed for olive plantation in southern Jordan. And rumour had it that the landowner was given a grant from the EU, but there's your Roman reservoir with a wonderful aqueduct system. And then early in October we photographed it again, and I noticed they've built a road and then an infrastructure system here. So this is a landscape that in the space of 20 years has gone from that to that, and it's a protected, recorded archaeological site, and that is part of the problem. The good news is that there are large areas of the Middle East and North Africa where the preservation of sites is fantastic. These are pendants and keyhole structures in Saudi Arabia. Archaeologists are great at coming up with completely meaningless terms. We have no idea what they are. We have no idea what date they are. So again, if anybody knows what they are, please tell me afterwards. So what do we want to do? Training and monitoring is important, and you'll hear more from Anna Leone on training. We have a project funded by the Cultural Protection Fund for training in Tunis, Amman and Beirut, and actually I need to update the slide because we've now got money to work in Egypt, which is great. This was a project we did in 2009 with money from Alesco in Jordan, and in a way the end game is that we want to help create digital national inventories. In Britain we call them historic environment records, but digital national inventories that actually would end up being on your phone, so that people can know where the archaeology is at the press of a button. And online but that's not up to us, that's for the local authorities. And final slide, the local community is key. If we don't do it with the local community, there's no point in doing it. This is Bert de Vries, who's been working at El Jamal for 46 years. That's a long time, and still he's finding people looting. El Jamal is a wonderful Roman, later Byzantine site in northeast Jordan. There's still people who are doing looting in his back garden. And that's it. Wow, in half an hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Stephen. I would like to invite you to consider my position as Italian speaker delivering a lecture in English after such three good English speakers. But I will do my best. On my side, I have the fact that I hope I have no problem of time, because I have to present a tiny project with a very specific objective, which was based on the principle that in our field also one single good man can. In 2009, under the umbrella of a major project which is Mosaicon, the MCC was a section of this project devoted to training restorer and archaeologists in 4 countries, which is Tunisia, Libya, Jordan, and Syria, in restoration and conservation of mosaics. Why mosaics? Because mosaics brings important messages from the past, because mosaics are very fragile, because mosaics most of the time are the last defense of an archaeological site. If you have an archaeological site with mosaics in situ, the site can be considered interesting and protected. When you remove or you lose the mosaic, all the rest is gone. So this project was, as I said, in coordination with other projects of Mosaicon. Mosaicon was an initiative organized by the International Committee for Conservation of Mosaics, by ICCROM, by the Getty Foundation, by the Getty Conservation Institute, and was funded by the Getty Foundation. In the frame of this project Mosaicon, we took the responsibility of training conservators and restorers of mosaics. The course was organized on the base of 6 years activity, and mainly in 2 sections. One was training and the other one was networking. As training, we started with a pool of 28 participants, out of which we extracted 16 of them for further training. The networking followed all the process of training. During these, and of course the networking is through the web, through meetings, through conferences, to helping the professional get connected into an international environment. The groups were from Syria. We had a great number of participants from Syria, all members of the General Directorate of Antiquities of Syria. Then we had a group from the Institut National du Patrimoine from Tunis. Then we had a group from Jordan, from the Department of Antiquities, and then we had a group of initially the Department of Antiquities of Libya, and then from the 2 departments of antiquity of Libya. So these people have been trained on the base of 2 parallel groups of activity, one in the field, in their region, and in the other one in Italy, in our headquarters, where they received practical and theoretical information and experiences. And between the two activities, our activity was to get connected with them, to follow them during what they were doing during their stay in their houses. This means that, in fact, this program was a program on the base of 6 years, 12 months a year, divided between their own regions and Italy. This is the calendar of all the courses that we gave. We started with one in 2011 in Syria, and then we followed, going on in mixing the team, because one of our objectives was to break the border between the 4 Arab countries and build one single inter-Arab professional group, which is what at the end we achieved. Together with the map you saw before, we extended the activities, working as a single group for 2 years in 2016, and in 2017, when this group of 15 people has been busy in 2 months field project, again all together working as a single team. I must say that probably this was the best satisfaction, to see the way when we are on the level of archaeology, of culture and professional, the nationalism and the politics disappear. Now they are a phenomenal one single group, ready to work in all the Mediterranean region, very, very high skill level. Here we are in Ephesus. Here we are in Rome. This is a group of Syrians. And here, this is last year, we are in San Cesareo, near Rome, restoring the mosaics of the Villa of Cesare in San Cesareo. This is the network of MCC. These are all the persons that took part to these 6-year activities, and they are all the people that today are connected into a single professional network. Let me use some video now.
Provided by the Centro di Conservazione Archeologica, or CCA, a conservation training center near Rome with leading expertise in mosaic conservation.
It began with a course for Syrian restorers, which was to take place in Damascus. But given the instability in the country, the project was moved to CCA's training center outside of Rome. And what was originally seen as an obstacle actually wound up being a real benefit. The restorers were really able to bond as a group, to form a strong cohort. The program was so successful that additional cohorts came to CCA's Center for Training from Tunisia, Jordan, and Libya.
What is very much on our heart is the following up of this and the sustainability of what they got in the courses. So, for example, these are some of the participants when they go back in their activities. Because they were member of the local Department of Antiquities, they went back to their original position. And of course, they found themselves in a way better position. And at the moment, they are a core group of professionals who is producing a lot and working a lot in conservation and restoration of mosaics and on sites with mosaics. For instance, this is one person from Madaba, from Jordan, who is now a teacher and is producing a new group of conservators. Amongst this, I would like to tell you a little bit more of what one of the groups did. For example, this is a very new information. This is the exhibition at the moment, ongoing at the moment in Paris, Palazzo del Mondo Arabo. And in this exhibition there is exhibited a mosaic from Jordan, this was in Jerash, and this has been fully restored by the Jordanian team and exhibited in Paris with a great success. And I can guarantee that we did not give them one finger of help. They did everything by themselves. For us was a great satisfaction. But let's give a look to what the groups of Syrians have been doing between one course and another. They have been very active in protecting and saving mosaics in areas of war. The arrows indicates some of the places where they have been working. For example, here we are in Damascus, when the mosaic of the El Umayyad mosque was hit by a shield, and with serious damages, they built the scaffoldings and they restored the damage from the bomb with a very high quality work that they implemented in their laboratory, the laboratory that was set with our help. And this is a job that they did by themselves, completely by themselves. Of course, we monitored them at distance, remote, but that was an interesting result. Here we are in Sueda in 2010. They identified this mosaic as endangered, and they documented and restored the mosaic, and then they backfilled to protect it against risks of war. This is how the mosaic was in 2014. Here we are in Damascus, another mosaic that was in risk. They protected with canvas and then they backfilled it. Here we are in Al-Marra, this wonderful Byzantine mosaic. This was backfilled to prevent further damages, documented and backfilled. This is the Sueda Museum, that was a place at high risk of bombing and attack. This museum, the floor of this museum were backfilled with sand and dirt. And this is how it is now. The same museum, they couldn't remove the mosaics from the walls because they were in concrete. So the one on the left, for example, is 2 tons in weight. So they simply built a second wall, a fake wall, so that when our friends of ISIS enter in the museum, they see this beautiful wall and they don't understand that behind the wall there are the mosaics. This is what they have been doing with remote support for these years. Here we are in Palmyra. If you remember, last year there was a window of 2 weeks when the Russians succeeded to throw ISIS away. Our team went there immediately and they recovered some of the mosaic, and they succeeded to bring the mosaics in Damascus for restoration. Unfortunately, the window was open only for a couple of weeks, and we are very worried because they had prepared other mosaics on the ground floor to be moved to Damascus, but they could not succeed to move them. So I wonder what happened with those mosaics. This is during the operation of recovering mosaic and preparing them to be moved to Damascus. In Damascus, there is the central laboratory and the central storage where they are based. And which were the objective of MCC? The objective of MCC was basically to produce very small groups of well-trained professionals, and transform this group as independent, self-sustaining groups of professionals, and at the same time part of an international work, of an international network. This is, again, the Syrians reorganizing the central storage. This is what I think, some of the tasks that they received, the training that they received, one was English language. Because it's a fact that if you don't have English, you cannot communicate today. The other one was communication. We invited Robert Ferguson from the Institute of Education in London, and he gave them a wonderful course in communicating. And this was very successful. Now they are perfectly able to manage call, conference call, presentations. Last week in Barcelona there was the triennial conference of the International Committee for Conservation of Mosaics, and almost all the participants of MCC presented their own paper or poster or video. This was a great success. So the other thing that we are guaranteeing them is a certain kind of help for developing their laboratories and storage areas. We invite them to attend, in the last 9 years, they've been attending 3 international conferences. And of course, we have a Facebook, the project has a Facebook page and so on and so on. And then the project receives a great interest from the media, of course, and when the media come, the politicians come, and they are protected. We have 5 Director General out of 4 countries that are strongly pushing to have this project going on. We have the full support of them, but what is, I think, the best aspect of this is that this new generation of conservators already started to train new 4th generation of conservators. The Syrians and the Jordanians especially are extremely strong in this, and we already have multiplied the effect of this first generation of MCC. Here we are in Jordan, before we were in Damascus, here we are in Jordan again. I don't know how long we have, and let me say thanks to the Getty Foundation, because they funded 100% of this wonderful project. I shouldn't say wonderful, of this project. If you have patience, I would like to show you a couple of short videos about what they have been doing. I think that video can better represent the experiences. This is a report, a video report made by the participants of the course of the site experience that we carried out last year in Ephesus, in Turkey. We have been not simulating, we have been working for 2 months in one of the domus of the terrace house, where, as always, the mosaics were in really terrible shape and in risk of getting lost. So they have been working as a single team for 2 months, starting from the very beginning of planning the intervention, getting organized with all the logistics, identifying the best local materials and tools to use, document the damages, design a plan, and carry out the preventive conservation intervention. All the project has been carried out keeping the work site open to the public. the participants prepared information panels for the tourists and wrote under terms of rotation. One of them was available to interact with the tourists day after day. Here we had the addiction of Turkish local conservators, so don't forget that here in this group there is a mixture of 6 different nationalities. Everything is done with materials and equipment and tools accessible to their own countries. The video was shot with simple iPhones and telephones and cameras. The editing was done with a normal laptop. Well, of course, the music not. Injecting is a simple lime made with the same composition as the original background, following the Vitruvius receipt. Lime that we found in Turkey and we know is available in Syria and Tunisia and Jordan. No need for buying extra materials. Lime and brick powder. Logistics and the work organization is a main point in this field. We have been investing a lot in producing kind of mind approach where everything has to be organized, prepared and cleared after the work. And then of course they use their beautiful skills. They are excellent mosaicists in training because, for example, the groups from Jordan, they are wonderful mosaicists and they were a little depressed because we kept them in consolidating, but finally we let them fill in the lacuna and they were magicians. This is because this place is a kind of museum, even if it is on site. The terrace house in Ephesus is under a huge shelter, so it's a kind of museum. So we are treating mosaic like if they were pieces of museum for the tourism. This is something that should not happen, for example, on site emergency operations. But here you can do. because we finished what was planned 15 days in advance, we decided to invest the 2 spare weeks in maintaining other floors in terrace house. So we dedicated some time in cleaning and consolidating opus sectilia, which are very common in their countries. So what you see here is the team acting on different floors in other houses. Still alive? So if you are alive, this is 3 minutes video. Maybe you can resist. This is the example. This is the example of the Villa di Cesare in San Cesareo, where they found, we found a situation of the mosaic that is very similar to the bombed one in their countries, because the condition of conservation were so low that, in fact, when you were saying that we don't have this problem in Europe, you were optimistic, because in Europe we have those problems, unfortunately. And here we have been implementing this year for 2 months a real on-site emergency operations for rescuing, protecting, and backfilling mosaics in danger. And we are 30 kilometers far from Rome, so in fact no need to go to Syria to find this kind of disasters. Nothing strange. This is how the majority of mosaics are after being excavated and then abandoned by our colleagues, the archaeologists. This is very common. I am archaeologist, I can say. This is very common, and unfortunately this is our reality every day, everywhere, no matter the country. This wonderful floor was excavated 5 years ago and was absolutely in perfect conditions, and was also published in perfect conditions. 5 years after, this is what we found. You can imagine how relieved our colleagues from the Middle East were in realizing that in Rome we share the same treatments to archaeological sites. And you see here the approach is completely different. No filling with tesserae, no jokes, only hard work, and only huge quantities of work. I would like to transmit a little bit more of the quantity and the quality of the work that this group from the Middle East has been doing, because it's absolutely remarkable. There is a last video, 8 minutes.
Complimenti,
Oh, sorry. Let's say that the other serious problem in our field is represented by the thousands of mosaics which were excavated in the past, removed from the site and relaid on reinforced concrete. Mosaics on reinforced concrete are mosaics that are condemned to destruction. There is no doubt. It's only a matter of 10 years more or 10 years less. But in a matter of 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the mosaics explode because the cement is rich in salts and because the iron inside expands. The support explodes and the mosaic break. And it was a common use from the foreigner archaeological missions in countries of the Middle East to excavate, lift mosaics, put them on reinforced concrete and run. Now the heritage that these countries face every day are thousands kilometers of square kilometers of mosaics relaid on reinforced concrete which explode. So the other line of training that we provided to the group was to remove the mosaics from the support in reinforced concrete and to relay it on a stable new setting bed of lime and aluminum. So what you see here is the process. Again, is a 2 months experience in our laboratory where the same group has been practicing how to remove mosaics from reinforced concrete cement.
شوية على تبقى شوية على المكعبات.
As I was saying, what is incredible is how much this group is devoted. They work in such hard way that they went over the performances of a professional experienced group. They restored these panels in 2 months when normally the normal time is almost the double. And they worked always in a wonderful spirit. So first the mosaic is removed from the concrete support thanks to the canvas that we apply on top, and then when only the canvas and the tesserae are left, we relay it on a new bed of clay. That was the interpreter who was always speaking. They wanted to kill him. So when the tesserae are isolated on the canvas, they are relayed on fresh clay so that when we remove the canvas, we can restore the texture of the mosaic before reapplying it on a new setting bed of lime-based mortar applied on aluminum honeycomb. That is very light and solid support. Don't forget that editing video like this is totally in their hands today, and this is the way they document their work in their house.
Questo è molto bello perché più o meno lavora spesso, guardate sempre quello più adatto.
was a big crack in the middle, so when it's applied on fresh clay, we can move the tessere and fill the lacuna. In this case it's important because this is a piece that will go in the Museum of Baia near Napoli, from where it came. When the restoration is finished, new canvas is applied, the mosaic is lifted again from out of the clay and is applied on the final support made of aluminium and mortar. The aluminium honeycomb is the same material of which the bodies of the airplane are made. So it's extremely light, stable, with 50 years of application in this field, so it's fully guaranteed. This is the preparation of the new supports. The brown grit is just work to let the mortar, the lime mortar, get attached. And then on the mortar the tessere are relayed inside. When the first piece is complete, we start with the second one. This is the mortar of Vitruvio. All this is something that they can do in their laboratories. And in fact is what they did with the mosaic for Paris.
Guarda i bordi.
So, to conclude, this was a very small project with a very small objective. That was to prepare a small number of professionals which will be able to work in their own countries in a self-sustainable environment. Thank you very much.